Wow, Peter, what was that?
I don't know, but it woke me up. Wake you guys up?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, I wasn't prepared for that.
Yeah, it certainly gets the blood pumping. I've got a subwoofer here, and definitely this room was rocking. So, just like round six, I was going to call it, but I guess we're calling it officially the 2024 MITRE ATT&CK Evaluations Enterprise. Dropped ingenuity, but Yoni Parker, thank you for joining me. Welcome to the show, Yoni.
Yeah,
This
Glad to
is
be here.
Yoni. This is what year six for you?
My sixth, seventh, if you count the services test.
That's right.
wow.
Seventh evaluation. 6 years at Palo Alto, or no, 8 years at Palo Alto Networks. And if we go back to Lightsaber, I think you said it was almost 11 years.
Pretty much, yeah.
Awesome. And you're leading the research team and now some of the engineering teams as well. So your team is just heavily involved in both the research that guides the detection content and the evaluations themselves. So thank you for all the efforts. And Parker, back second year involved in the attack evaluations for Palo.
Yep. Yeah, happy to be back. This time again, not in London, but in Baltimore. I was involved since well, back then we called it round two.
Yes.
At another life. So
Yep.
happy to be doing year two with Palo.
Yep, definitely. Names changing a little bit. We are not talking about rounds this year. So there's going to be some other things we're gonna notice that have changed as well. Whoops, don't need that video. We already went through it. I thought I'd just throw up an agenda. We are going to walk through just about everything here. We'll start with some opening thoughts on the evolution of the attack evaluations. We'll give you a quick background. Every year, I kind of go through for those that might be new to it, what the attack evaluations are all about, what MITRE is all about. So we'll cover that. We'll be quicker this year because hopefully folks are getting used to it and understand more about this. Then we'll dive into the results. We'll take a look at 2024 results, and we'll pontificate and reflect on the state of the evaluations like we do each year. Parker, that was fun last year. And then we'll take a look at what's coming next. But let's start with this. Initial thoughts. I'm going to stop sharing for now so I can see your faces. And
I'm excited. I'm excited about these results. I'm excited about the changes. I don't know about you guys. One of the big things for me is well, actually, Peter, this is your big thing. No names, no glorification of the threat actors this year.
yeah, super happy about that. I remember we went to the vendor council, which I'm hoping will start up again a couple of years ago, and we had a few asks. You're going to see some of them show up this year, but that's probably my favorite one is we're no longer kind of naming the attack evaluations after adversaries, giving them notoriety. It's just something I never wanted to do. So happy to see that change.
I like to say that there was also a reduction in complexity. I don't know. That may be controversial.
How
I would
so?
agree with that.
Yoni?
Well, I see. Oh, go ahead, Yoni. Yeah.
Yeah, in some senses, you see, the last one was Turtle, which are an extremely advanced threat actor, even though now we dropped the name, but they're still trying to emulate some specific threat actors. And they went for more DPRK and ransomware groups, which are usually a bit less, let's say, aggressive with their technology and a bit more aggressive with their people skills. And that changes a lot. You see a major difference in the technical complexity, but a lot more things that some of them at least are a lot more real life. You usually don't get hacked by the GRU. You get hacked by a random ransomware group. So in a sense, it's a bit more day to day, so a bit less complex, but also a bit more lifelike. There are a few sides to that, but it's definitely an interesting take that I think MITRE has definitely hurt us when we said, okay, you've done an amazing job implementing Turla, but that wouldn't happen anywhere in reality, or almost anywhere, in a few very specific scenarios.
Yeah, great point. I was thinking about the telemetry. I'm sorry, telemetry, Peter, is gone.
Yeah.
And for me, when I was looking at the results, it was really complicating how we looked at those results. So seeing one extra kind of category go away when we didn't need it, I think that's a good thing.
Yep, definitely. I was actually thinking they got more complicated, but that's because I was thinking more about the false positives angle. When we look at the results, you guys will see that if people are wondering, if you haven't been tuning in past years and you're wondering, what is Parker talking about, telemetry detections, all that stuff. We're going to go through it. We're going to talk about it. I'll give you all that rundown. But yeah, definitely some major changes. I think it's more relevant for more people this year than a Turla evaluation would be. Results have somewhat gotten more complicated and less complicated at the same time. So
Well,
let's,
we can't
yeah.
go on without the elephant in the room, right?
What's that?
False positives.
Yeah. False positive in terms of just the addition. So that was one of the other things we asked back in the vendor council. I met with you two actually. We talked about what were the changes we wanted to put forward. I think MITRE gave us 2. I think I came with 3. One of the things we all agreed on was we wanted the test to include false positives. We thought it was not representative of kind of the real world without it. And Yoni, I remember looking at you saying, that's going to make the test more challenging. And you said, bring it on. That's the way it should be.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are a lot of challenges with testing false positive, especially since the MITRE environment is quite small, and then you're and there's only so much you can test during that time. There's not they didn't hire an army of people to work for the fake company they are simulating, so there's definitely that there's a hard way it's a hard way to simulate such thing. But with that being said, I think they've really made an effort, and even progressing towards that and testing that, and not just like just assuming it will never happen. I think that's a very good change in pace, and I think it did change a lot of vendors' approach to this test, which you're seeing less like let's just turn the dial to 11 and see what happens. And they're a lot more careful with what they're actually delivering, and it's a lot more real life in that sense, just by the fact that a false positive test exists, and not even though the content could have been improved, but that's always true.
Definitely. We're going to talk more about false positives. I know you've got a favorite one in here to talk about, Yoni, so we'll get to that. But let me get back to our presentation here, and I'm just going to start by giving level setting on what we're talking about here. So first and foremost, the MITRE Enterprise Attack framework is essentially a framework that just lays out all of the methods, we'll call them tactics, and the techniques that adversaries use to compromise businesses. So you've probably seen it. If not, you'll see a couple different depictions of it here. Lots of different ways to visualize it. But across the top, you've got things that you've all heard about: initial access, execution, lateral movement, credential access, command and control, exfiltration. Those are the what an adversary is doing it, maybe the motivation, the why they're doing it. And then underneath each one of those, you've got the techniques, the how they're accomplishing that, whether it's remote service session hijacking, or I don't know what your favorite technique this year was, Yoni. Anything that stood out this year?
In a sense, I think just because it's a lot more complex, there's a lot more common things, and that's again, they didn't try and go fancy. So I wouldn't say there's one specific technique, but definitely liking the trying to be a bit more authentic and a bit less advanced.
Right. So I always talk about kind of the difference between MITRE and MITRE Ingenuity. As I understand it, there's still 2 different organizations, but we've been told this year that we can drop the Ingenuity when we're talking about these results. MITRE maintains this attack framework. MITRE Ingenuity is the organization that has been engaged in these attack evaluations. There are several different attack evaluations, so I'm going to talk about those and just clarify what we're talking about today. Today, we're talking about 2024, the enterprise evaluation. So there is a managed services evaluation set that is about to start round 3, and we are just finishing up round 6. We're calling it 2024 now, of the enterprise evaluation. And the difference here, the enterprise evaluation is a product evaluation, right? You've got a red team that's, well, spending the majority of the time in the year creating and crafting a very sophisticated attack. And then when we enter into this multi-day engagement, they're executing malicious attacks. And the blue team, us, is observing what's happening and then just showing what the product displays. There's no investigation. There's no diving in and kind of analyzing what happened. You're just kind of showing what the product was able to show in response to that attack. On the managed services side, it's different, right? You can dive in, you can connect to an endpoint, you can do some research. The goal there is not to showcase the effectiveness of the product from a detections and preventions perspective, but more to showcase the quality of a report that can be generated by the managed services team. So Unit 42 drives our managed services evaluations. We are about to engage in round 3. But today, we're talking about the 2024 enterprise evaluation. And so just to kind of get into it a little bit more, the enterprise evaluations were created because MITRE noticed, this is back before MITRE Ingenuity existed, that vendors were all kind of claiming they had full coverage for everything that was in that MITRE ATT&CK framework that we talked about before, but there really was no neutral authority to kind of back up those claims. So it's that kind of was the motivation for MITRE to start these evaluations. The goal was to make a very open and transparent evaluation or test where the methodology was clearly published. And really, in round 3, we saw it change significantly to move not just from detection, but into detection and prevention. And the outcome of that from MITRE is really observations, right? It's not winner, loser, best, leaders. There's no wave or MQ sort of quadrants. It's just data. Here's what we did. Here's the screenshots. Here's how we observed those detections. There is a grading of each of those detections, which we'll get into. And Parker, I've got some things here. Changes for this year. We're going to talk about this a lot. False positives were introduced this year. And the other thing that was significantly different this year was much more coverage for non-Windows platforms. So that's a little bit about MITRE. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's huge. That's it.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah. So I thought I'd just focus a little bit on the adversaries. We touched on this already. Again, apologies. We're changing the title. This is 2024, not round 6, but same thing. And not named after an adversary, but the adversaries that were emulated this go round. One adversary, DPRK. This is North Korea, which has definitely emerged as a formidable threat. And they're leveraging cyber attacks to fund their military programs, their nuclear weapons programs. A great threat vector session between David Moulton and Asaf Dahan on your team, Yoni, where they kind of dive into what the motivation is and how DPRK is doing things. Really, really fascinating conversation there. And then the other focus for this one was ransomware. More specifically, I would say ransomware as a service. And I know we've been talking about ransomware for a long time, but it continues to be one of the most significant cyber threats across all verticals and globally. And this is just showing you, right? It is hitting manufacturing more than anywhere, but this spans every industry, every vertical that we cover that our customers are in. So really interesting adversaries to choose for this year. Any thoughts on the choices?
I think, as I've said, I think that it's a lot more common to see one of these groups attack, especially in the tech industry. So we're seeing them. They're active, and actually, my team has recently published, I think, 5 or 6 different research papers on their activities. So they're definitely doing a lot. They're investing a lot into it, and I think it's a cool, looking at the actual implementation, that they have taken a lot of actual real things that we've seen in the wild and implemented them in the actual test. So both are really cool for MITRE themselves, and again, I think a good choice for threat actor, as it's a lot more common and a lot more probable that as a company you will get breached by them.
Perfect. Parker, any thoughts?
I mean, yeah, it's just, if we're going to test and, the outcome is better alignment with what customers are operating in their environments and, what reality is going to be for them, it's just a better alignment. So end to end, all around, with the changes with false positive, we're forcing the vendors to be more operational in their configurations, and then giving them a test that they're more likely to actually experience in their environment. So, I think this is more representative of, like Yoni said, what's likely to happen to them. So good on MITRE.
Definitely. And Yoni, we've got some links at the end. There are definitely some great research coming out of your team and the rest of Unit 42 on this. I'm going to dive into the scope for 2024. There were this year uniquely 4 evaluation scenarios. One thing I wasn't clear on, right? It's always been kind of a 4-day evaluation where day 1 and day 2 last year and the last couple of years were focused on detection. And the 3rd day was focused on prevention. And then there was a 4th day for do-overs. I didn't get the lowdown on what happened this year. Was it 4 days again, Yoni?
Yeah, same in that perspective. Even though it lists 3 scenarios, it was 2 days for detection, 1 day for protection, and they've ran through all 3 of the detection scenarios in the 2-day period.
Got it.
And I think they have been a bit more, for our talking about the test themselves, they've been since there were false positive tests, they were a bit more specific in the way they've shared the test results. So they waited for actually finishing all of the tests, then and didn't share what are false positive or not until you've actually, brought in the information, which is, I think, a very good approach to testing. And instead of laying it out for you, and for a fact what isn't a false positive, which I think is a very again, a good step forward as part of doing a sort of a double-blind test of what actually the product detected instead of sharing the details before.
Kudos to MITRE for that. And I'll just cover at a high level. DPRK focused on macOS. We talked about the expanded coverage for non-Windows platforms. This was macOS Sonoma 14X. And that was the first scenario. The next two scenarios were the ransomware scenarios, both Clop for Windows and Lockbit, which was kind of crossing both Linux and Windows. This is Windows Server 2022 and Windows 11. And then for Linux, it was Ubuntu 2204. Yeah, so a lot of good coverage there. And I'll just say overall for detection, there were 16 steps, 80 malicious sub-steps. And then on the false positive side, there were 20 steps that were dedicated to testing non-malicious activity. And on the protection side, 10 steps overall, broken down into 21 sub-steps, and even more false positives there. And I would say the false positives on the prevention side or protection side might even be more interesting because they might represent blocks that might impede actual business activity. Thoughts on that before we jump into interpreting the results a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, right? When we talk about sub-steps as false positives, when some of the sub-steps might not atomically be bad in all cases, like being able to encrypt some files or zip up some folders and things like that. So it's really interesting to think, like, as you look at these results, think about that and like the context that the products that you're looking at and evaluate have to take into account to be able to determine what's good versus bad.
We're going to dive into actually some of those steps, even the ones you mentioned there. Before we get into the results, I just want to make sure everybody understands them. So this is a graphic coming from MITRE. It's changed this year. You pointed it out earlier, Parker. There are no telemetry detections. And for those that are wondering what the heck a telemetry detection is, basically, as I mentioned, red team, blue team, we're showing what's in the product. In the past, if you didn't have an alert or an incident or whatever your solution calls it that highlighted the attack activity that was being simulated, you could actually go and search in your data lake. You could create a query and kind of pull that data out and show that to them and get essentially a telemetry detection. That's been removed this year. I don't think it was very effective. And I'm glad to see it go, frankly. That's one of the big changes. The other is a no analytic coverage. And I think they actually officially dropped that last year. There used to be this term they talked about. If you had a general, a tactic, or a technique detection, any of those, it would be blanketed in this term analytic detection. And MITRE's removed that. But if I just cover what this is, right? You might get a score of NA for one of the detection tests if, for example, you didn't participate in the Linux evaluation. I think there were a handful of vendors that didn't participate, and that might be a reason you get an NA, a not applicable score for one of the detections. If your product had nothing to show for evidence that an attack happened, you'd get a score of none. And then up from that in quality, moving left to right, you've got general, which says essentially that as they were doing something in the evaluation, you were able to detect that, but not with a lot of specificity, right? But if you get a tactic detection, now your product is actually correctly identifying that the malicious activity that happened is lateral movement, right? But not all the way to exactly how that happened. To get a technique level detection, maybe you can talk about it, Yoni. I know you've talked with MITRE about it a lot, but you're actually specifying not just what happened, but how it happened. And I know there's a lot of detail that's needed for that. Thoughts on that, Yoni?
Sure. I don't think it's different this year than other years, but again, for getting a technique level detection, MITRE has definitely been trying to raise the bar in a few different perspectives. Again, there's a tagging piece, which is are you actually able to say with confidence that this is what happened? For example, lateral movement and that specific kind of lateral movement. And also there's the data source piece, which has been becoming a bit more let's say prominent within the MITRE discussion of it's not just, if you have a weak data source for detecting a specific technique, for example, a command line versus a strong one like API, an API call, that has become a bit more of a discussion every time we're doing technique level detection. In that sense, again, they're trying to raise the bar. There are things that are possible, not possible within that. But again, I think generally it's been a good way forward with what MITRE has been trying to do. Of course, more room to improve, but still definitely a step up from last year.
Great. And I'll just say that the two modifiers along with the detection results are still there. Delayed and configuration changes. And I'll just touch briefly on what that is. There's a link that I can provide for folks that really want to dive in. Delayed, essentially, just summarizing, means that the result came with some sort of human intervention. It wasn't just the product displaying it. Something needed to change to achieve that result. We didn't see many of these this year, a lot less than previous years. And then a configuration change, I mentioned this before, is essentially done on the fourth day, right? If a vendor's not happy with the detection that was provided by the product in result to any of the steps, they can come back on the fourth day and say, we want to do over on that, right? We want to see how our product would do if we make a change. And that change can be essentially just about anything. You can change the data sources, what's being collected. You can change the rules that govern detection logic. You can change what's presented in the presentation layer and the user interface. And anything that you change in that and that's done in that fourth day will get tagged with a configuration change modifier. Okay, I'm going to jump into the results, I think. Oh, before I do, I was just going to cover, and I think we've already covered this already, the big changes this year, the false positives introduction, probably don't need to go into it much more, and the expanded coverage. But with that, before we get into results, who participated? This is actually fascinating. I like looking at this each year. This is 2023. This is not this year. But we had, I think, 31 vendors that jumped in, that participated in 2023, and a couple that ended up not publishing. So we ended up with 29 that published. But it's kind of fascinating to look to see what happened this year. Those that didn't publish are back in. So Checkpoint, Cisco are back. And we had, I think, another 10 that dropped out this year. So big changes. My suspicion is this is really because of the expanded coverage, because of the introduction of false positives. This is just my guess as to why so many dropped out. The test got more challenging, and we saw quite a bit of change. Thoughts on this, guys?
Ooh, there's a lot to unpack here. Yeah, it's a tougher test.
Yeah.
When the false positive is probably the biggest driver here in my take. Yoni?
I generally agree. I think that there's definitely a cost incurred with doing this test. It's not just you need to talk to MITRE. There's a lot of steps of validating it. So I think that's if you're paying the price twice in a sense. You're investing the time, you're investing anything the people to do it, and then you're not getting a good result. And I think vendors prefer to just opt out if such a situation happens. So
Yep.
It's definitely a big investment going through these tests, and and I think again it's a good investment, and it's keeping us strong as an industry and making sure we're aligned with the best practices. And I think it's right now the only test that I think wholly tests the product end to end for threat detection, and the only one that customers can actually trust, or one of the strongest ones that exist right now. There are definitely other good ones, but I think this has become sort of the campfire for endpoint protection and endpoint detection, where
Yep.
I think if you're not here, you have to have a very good reason to make that decision. And I'm guessing it comes down to cost and the publicity, either negative or positive.
Yep, definitely.
I don't want to derail the whole conversation, but got a lot of comments coming in about why a company would pull out. And really, I mean, we can't speculate. So, if you want to know, just ask them. Like,
Right.
go to them and say, hey, why'd you pull out? I don't know. I don't want to speculate.
No speculation. Right? We saw some significant dropouts this year. But hey, look, we've been teasing the audience long enough. Let's get into the actual results. This is amazing, right? Second year in a row that Cortex XDR delivered 100% detection. And I think what's even better than that, this is the first time any vendor has ever delivered 100% detection with that highest level of detection, technique level detection. There were 80 steps in the evaluation. And amazing, Cortex XDR correctly identified at the technique level every one of those 80 steps in the detection side. most rigorous tests we've seen. We're going to get into the prevention side as well. Outstanding results there as well. I've just got the top 10 vendors from a market share perspective. I've got charts to kind of show you everything as well. So if you're watching and you're with one of the vendors that's not listed on this, don't worry, it's coming. But just outstanding results. So congratulations, Yoni, to you and the team. I know you guys put in a ton of work, not for the evaluations, but just to study not just DPRK and ransomware, but every adversary. And you've built a platform that continues to deliver outstanding results from just a detection, being able to see what's happening, the visibility, and to accurately identify and categorize the malicious activity we're seeing. So tremendous result on the detection side. Reactions.
I think there's two thoughts I have for this. One is that I think we've invested a lot into DPRK research, whereas there's of course the classical ransomware groups who are investing a lot into that as well, which I think is definitely paying off in production, and it's unrelated directly to this test, but definitely shows up as part of this test. And secondly, there's the technique level detection, which I think is something we really strive ourselves into, and we're investing. My team, when we're talking about detection, I think just doing general things it doesn't cut it anymore. Analysts expect us, SOC analysts expect us to provide details of what actually happened. We need to be very careful with what we actually show, because even if it's not a false positive and we're presenting an alert and that isn't clear cut to what it is and why it's interesting and what is the impact, it's just a waste of time. So an alert that's not actionable, especially if it's a detection piece, doesn't really cut it anymore. And I think MITRE has definitely pushed us to be a bit more specific, create a taxonomy for that, and I think that's definitely great. Maybe one last point that's interesting. In this specific test, there were a lot of data exfiltration tests, which are very common for DPRK. And my team has invested a lot into that. I see data exfiltration as the soft underbelly of most endpoint detection products. And there's a two ply thought to that. One is that if you go just very generic, you have a lot of false positive. And if you go too specific, you won't get a very good detection rate, and you're missing a lot of coverage. The only approach is to do both. So one is generic approaches to detect generally data exfiltration, and the other is being very threat actor aware, so DPRK in this specific scenario, and Lockbit and Clock, aware of what the kind of specific tools they usually use, the kind of tricks they usually use, and then you have a good chance of having a wide net with generic capabilities, but also having a very specific net with threat-informed detections and protections. And I think that you'll see it also in the protection test, but I think that applies both there and here. And again, since it's very, the test itself has been reduced in complexity. So in the technical complexity, there's a lot of complexity within the test itself. But in that sense, data exfiltration is a lot more prominent, and a lot more simple things like just sending out files to the internet and things like that that have been seen here. Which I think, again, stresses out the point that as endpoint security products, we definitely did a lot, but I think many products didn't invest the right time into doing data exfiltration correctly.
Yeah, I think detection is really important, but when you're talking about the types of techniques you're talking about right now, exfiltration prevention is really, really important, and we haven't really touched on that. This graph is just an updated one. This is the results for the prevention side. So Palo Alto Networks had the highest prevention rate amongst vendors that didn't have false positives. We're going to dive into that in more detail as well. This was actually really interesting. Just overall, I think vendors struggled with prevention this year. We had 8 prevented steps. We're going to go into what that looks like actually in the MITRE dashboard. But a lot struggled here, and we're going to look at the whole cohort thing. I think you're going to see just a lot of misses on the prevention side of things. So actually, let me just jump ahead here. I want to get into the actual MITRE dashboard. This, I promised I would show it. So this is the entire list of all cohorts, all 19, I believe, and their complete detection rate. We have one false positive I'll call out here. Some had a lot. We had very few. It's a really interesting one. Yoni, I know you want to talk about it, so we'll talk about that when we actually go into the results. We have differing opinions, not you and I, but maybe with MITRE on whether or not that was actually a false positive. So we'll talk about that. On the prevention side, before we get into the prevention side, let's actually take a look at the results. I'm going to jump in here. And before we get into the individual results, if folks don't know, Anybody has access to this. It is not gated. I'm hoping you are all seeing my screen. And
Yep.
I'm just going to take a look at the cohort level. This is how everybody did across the board. So we're looking at the tactics here on the left, right? Defense evasion, discovery. And before we dive into that too much, I want to just take a look at protections, right?
Hang on, Peter, can you go back to detections real quick?
Yeah, sure, we can.
So I'm looking at this for the second time because this just came out. I kind of like this cohorts view, and kind of my analyst brain here kind of tells me this is an amalgamation of all of the vendors' results. So what could be useful here is kind of understanding, where have things been commoditized and where could there be differentiation in the market. So interesting. I haven't seen this kind of view done before by MITRE. Really cool.
I do like it as well. And it points out, some things are more important than others, I think is what Yoni was alluding to. We look at exfiltration is a pretty impactful thing to happen to a business. And there was a lot of misses there on the detection of it. And I think it gets even more dramatic when we look at the protection side of things. Just so folks know, yellow is not blocked, right? So you're looking at all of the different things that were tested during the prevention. And there's just a tremendous amount of yellow. And I think you're going to see that in each of the results for every vendor. There was a lot missed on the prevention side.
Yeah.
So
I'm really happy with this. Last year, I kind of got a little uppity and said, I wish that, being able to analyze the data was better, and they gave us the 3 views. And I think this is also a nice step in that direction. Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to jump back in and we're going to take a look at the details on the prevention side, protection side. It's done in steps, and I'll show you why in just a minute. It gets a little hard to count in sub-steps because there's a lot of not applicable. We are right. Actually, I apologize. I resorted the graph and I highlighted somebody else. Harfang Lab is in green. It should be Palo Alto Networks. Apologies. Same score. 8 steps block. That's embarrassing. I apologize, guys. But let's take a look at what that looks like in the actual evaluation. I think it's really interesting. So what I'm going to do is switch to the individual instead of the cohort view. And I think I've just got arbitrarily, you can only choose 3 at a time here. I've got some of the EDR kind of market leaders here, and we are looking at protection. So the 4th scenario. So if we scroll down and take a look, some different things. We're seeing the noise here. So the black here represents reported false positives. So whoever this had 7, that is Sentinel-1, 7 reported false positives. This is us on the left. And Yoni, I think this is where we wanted to talk about some things. The counting of substeps gets complicated. You'll see here that Palo's got a couple of not applicable steps here. And what's actually happening here, I don't recall exactly what was done in these tests because they were never done in our environment. And that's because preceding this, if I remember, there was an SSH connection coming in from a unprotected endpoint that looked to be hailing out of China, and our agent blocked that, right? So because we blocked that, the steps here never were able to execute. Is that right?
Yeah, it's actually maybe an interesting point about how the test is actually being done. Before they MITRE executes a test, they do what they call a pre-flight check. So they would go and check that at least the basic level works. For example, SSHing into a device. And then of course, if that doesn't work, they tell us, well, pre-flight failed. Let's fix something, see if it works, because they don't consider it part of the test. That of course succeeded. And then they went through the test and said, we went through a process of understanding what went wrong with this test. And from our perspective, we blocked this since we blocked this even before, in a sense, before the test even started during the SSH activity. So in that sense, that's the reason why we're seeing an NA here, because in a sense, the initial access piece, which is the step -1 or step 0, doesn't exist here.
Yep. And I know you had a long, healthy conversation with the team at MITRE about this one. And they stuck to their guns in terms of these were not actually tested for us. And we feel strongly that this was the right place to block that. That SSH connection did not look like one that we were comfortable allowing. And we also believe strongly if we had been tested on these scenarios, it would have been blocked as well. Looking at another one, right? This one was an interesting one. I think you can actually scroll down and see what happened here. If we get down to step 5, it might take me a while to find it. But essentially, that was an encryption event, if I recall, via an SMB share. And in our environment, we immediately reverted that encryption activity and restored the files. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yep.
But the encryption was allowed to occur, which is why. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So we went down a philosophical discussion of what's the point of this test if nobody's deleting the backups and we can just restore them from backups. That's one piece of the puzzle, and the other piece is what's the difference between blocking and response? Or in this test, MITRE expected or required no vendor to do response actions, whereas I think the fact that it took us a minute to restore the files, we perceive this as a protection capability and not as a response capability. MITRE saw it differently, and that's the way it's even framed in the product. It's not like we did some playbook or response actions. That just the way the product works, with the assumption that we need more time to understand, make that decision, and worst case, we just have the backup and everything's okay, which is where we have been in long and lengthy discussions with MITRE around whether or not this makes sense or not, because the actual impact, if you look at the last step, it says encryption for impact. If there's no impact, did it actually encrypt for impact?
Right, that's a great point. Yeah, so in the end, for this step, there would be no business impact to our customers because the files that were encrypted were restored. But I get it from their perspective. They were able to execute these steps in the evaluation. Yeah, so it's an interesting one to look at.
Hey, Peter.
Yeah.
Can we show people how to look at the results with either config changes or not config changes? I think that's an interesting thing.
It is definitely an interesting
thing. Because I'm seeing a little bit of chatter in the comments around that. And so I want to make sure people can, don't necessarily just listen to us, go check it out yourselves, trust but verify.
Yeah.
And then while you're doing that, there's another comment in here I wanted to address real quick, no 0-day testing. Yeah, I mean, these are emulations. So we have to know something about the threat actor and how they behave. So we're emulating that behavior. So yeah, no 0-day tests.
Okay, so just so folks, if you're interested in looking at the results on your own, as you navigate 2024, right? This is 23, Turla. We're looking at 24. We're actually looking at scenario 1, DPRK on macOS. Note, if you switch here, I think maybe they fixed it. It's going to change your participant. So I like to go up here and change the scenario in the URL. But we're looking at scenario number 1, DPRK on macOS. And if you include detections that came from configuration changes or delayed detections, everybody got the same score. But if you take those out and see what the raw results were the first run through of this before the do-over, the results are different. And that's the difference that you were looking for. That's how you see kind of how the product worked out of the box. How did it work in the first go run versus if you came back for day 4 and you recognized that you weren't entirely happy with your result, what that would look like. So that's that.
Now, maybe I take a little bit too hard line of a stance. I say that's the test that basically you have as a customer. So what are you actually? You don't get a redo.
Right.
So that's I don't know. I feel strongly about that.
I agree with you. And what you're looking at, just so folks know, this is the summary of this scenario. If you want the detailed, I mentioned there were, I think, 16 steps in day 2 or scenario 2. There were actually 4 steps: persistence, command and control, discovery and exfiltration, and defense evasion at the end to clean up. And if you take a look there, the results will change as you toggle these configuration modifier or these detection modifiers. So that's scenario 2. Maybe I'll just drop down to scenario 3 so everybody can see the full detection results for us and a couple other vendors. And again, I would show everybody, but once you've selected 3, you can't go on to the 3rd. We've got a solution for that for you as well. If those of you that saw last year, we introduced a dashboard which allows you to see all vendors at once. But Parker, hopefully this addresses your question, right? Again, if you add configuration changes, things get a little bit cleaner. It's pretty easy to get detections once you know what happened and you're doing a redo on it. So, all right. Yeah, that was a little bit of a deep dive into the results. There's so much more we could look at. Any particular steps you wanted to take a look at, Yoni, or anything you wanted to dive into?
We can go down the false positive if you want to talk about that.
Oh yeah, we should. Definitely. We did have one false positive. I think that was in scenario 2, if I remember correctly. And it's an interesting one. So let's take a look. All right. So where do you see false positive? You see it here. And I'm going to turn off the config changes and delay detections. We had one false positive, and I don't know if I can actually navigate to it, but I know you know what happened very well there. So do you want to talk about it for us?
Yeah, sure. So when you're looking at this is a ransomware scenario. So there's a ransomware threat actor. And the way MITRE approach doing false positives is that during the scenario, at some point in time, the same or a different endpoint might just, do something that is just unrelated directly to the attack. In this specific scenario, what they did is they turned off the Windows firewall, which is
Wait, the same user or like somebody else?
I'm not sure if I recall correctly. Same computer, not sure if same user.
Same computer and same time, right? It was on this Diagon Alley endpoint. So in the midst of all this malicious activity, somebody used the command line to shut off the firewall. All rules, right?
Unrelated.
Everything.
Nice.
So then you're in a situation where you have a lot of context that says something really weird is going on in this computer, or even generally in the environment, and then somebody turns off the firewall at the same point in time. You're like, even just putting it out there. Let's say I'm a person and not even a threat hunter and not even a product, and I have no limitations. I have the best LLM in the world in my mind, and I'm trying to understand if this is related or not. This, we looked at this and we're like, for sure, it has to be related to everything. It's also a very common thing that threat actors do, and then trigger an alert, and that makes sense. And we're discussing this with MITRE, and they asked, "What do you think this is? This is a false positive or not?" And we're like, this has to be related to the attack. We don't understand why exactly they did this, but nobody just willy-nilly turns off their firewall just like that. And their answer has been pretty much it happens, which is true. It does happen in real life, but I think there's a standard here that in that specific sense, there's a point where you can strive to be the best you can, and this is just one of those things where false positive exists, and you have to live with them. The other option is tuning this rule to the point where it's not really useful, because again, it happens in real life where threat actors turn off the firewall. So differentiating between that is practically impossible.
Yeah, if MITRE says it's false positive, I'm happy that happy with that.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting one. I think in any case, most people would want to know if their system was under attack and there was a malicious campaign happening, that firewall was shut down. I understand MITRE's perspective, right? The action of going into the command line and shutting down the firewall is not necessarily malicious, but from our perspective, and Yoni, I think you explained it really well. In the midst of all of that, it sounds like something that is at least suspicious and you'd want to know about. But just outstanding results overall. Yeah, go ahead, Parker.
I was going to say, did you want to? I think we're getting pretty close to time.
Yes, I wanted to just mention that we're at the end from a slides perspective. I know we have lots of questions, but I did want to just mention the attack dashboard that we stood up last year is just analyzing the data. If anybody wants to know where it comes from, for every vendor, you can just come up here and click the download, and you'll get the actual observations that MITRE Ingenuity made during the evaluation in a JSON format. If you love JSON, it's great. If you are not a total nerd, then it might be challenging for you. But what we did is build a site that would help look at all that data from just a data introspection perspective. And that site will be updated, I think, later today, maybe tomorrow. We are uploading the JSON for that as well. And it's going to give you the full picture so you can compare vendors side by side, see how everybody did, look at historical views, and no limitations you can do.
Yeah, we wanted that out early, but there's some minor changes. We want to make sure we don't put any wrong information out there. So apologies.
Absolutely.
So that in the LinkedIn post, we'll include the link for that whenever we publish it. Sorry about that.
Yep. And I'm going to stop sharing. I think I've got everything up there at this point. I might throw up the resources in a bit here, but we're winding down. And just I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on the evaluation. Now that we've looked at the results, I know last year we talked about things. I put up a picture of Oprah and said, the state of the evaluations is everybody gets 100%, right? There's a blog from everybody. We have a blog out this year that says we got 100%. Hopefully you understand why we're saying that. It's not just at the step level, but at the detection level. We built a product that is just phenomenal at seeing everything and accurately detecting and categorizing things. There's a lot of nuance to how folks are making that claims. But if you look at the MITRE results, it's pretty clear that it was not a lot. So I don't think we need to talk about it this year, but what's the state of the attack evaluations this year? We lost 10 vendors. False positives are in. You guys liking the direction?
I love it personally. I think that this solidifies the main outcome of this test. And I think it's always going to be used. There's a little bit of marketing here, but I think the main outcome is the engineering outcomes, which is getting back to the original purpose and vision for MITRE doing this, which is accelerating innovation for public good. Sorry, I just had to look at that so I didn't mess it up. but helping all of us vendors continuously improve. Yoni's got his research team, over 200 researchers. They do a great job, but getting the validation and making sure and having this test harness and going through a third party is invaluable. And it only helps get everybody to a better place. And I think that's what it's all about. And I think going away from the Oprah era is nothing but good.
Yeah. Yoni, your thoughts?
I definitely agree with Parker. I have feedback, and the MITRE team has heard it for sure. And I think I want to give a shout out to the MITRE team for being patient with us and receptive to feedback. And also on the other side, they've been very firm with what they believe and what they think is the right choice, and being very fair with every vendor. And I think even the fact that we have that false positive, and they're like, this is what we consider a false positive. We're not cutting you any slack. I'm truly appreciative of that, because again, it's very easy to succumb to the pressure of redefining it, and then everybody gets 100. And when you get from one side a very technical team that really tries to emulate a strong scenario, and also a very smart and let's say dedicated management team on the MITRE side that's very firm with what they believe, and they're willing to not compromise on the test, I think you see a different result. And I think this year they have been hearing the feedback, and they have, I think, made a concrete effort to stop the Oprah situation where everybody gets 100, which I think it shows. It shows in everywhere. False positive, the protection test, pretty much everything. The selection of the threat actors. I am very appreciative of them.
Yeah. Yep, everywhere, right? I think from design all the way down to the dispute process, they did a great job. And we are just about to wrap up. We're going to get to questions, but I just wanted to touch on, I'll throw my screen up one more time. What's coming next, right? For those that are following the MITRE evaluations, the next one coming up is the Managed Services 2025, and there is a call for participation now. So that is looking to, I think, start. You need to sign up by late February, and execution begins in April, May 2025. We were talking with MITRE about this one. I think we are participating. I'm not sure if that has finalized yet, but I expect we'll be there. And I'm not sure what's happening from a enterprise evaluation round 7. It should be 2025 or whatever it is.
I hope so.
Yeah. Parker?
There's more to MITRE though than just these. One of the things if you don't know, please go check out the Center for Threat Informed Defense GitHub. They've got an adversaries emulation hub repository that is fantastic. They've got emulations for some of the previous emulations that they've done, and they've also got micro emulations, which I think will help teams more, be able to do their own, but in little bite-sized chunks. So be able to test your own. And then the other thing that I wanted to say is kick things off with the comments. There's been a lot of chatter about config changes, and I've raised my voice last year and talked about it personally. Some of y'all know how I feel. There's been some defense. I think that personally, config changes, yeah, they are needed to make sure the vendors are going to participate. Nobody wants to go and not know how they're going to do, or have some safety rails. But maybe, I don't know what you guys think. Maybe like an ombuds process about that to make sure there's a valid reason for retest.
It's a good question. I think the purpose, from my understanding and talking to the MITRE team for configuration changes, and MITRE says, right, this is not a competitive evaluation, a comparison. It's not meant to be. It's become that. And I think the purpose for those configuration changes is really for vendors to have an opportunity to play and see how their product would do if it tweaked. The detection rule sets what we were gathering, and it's really for our benefit, right? It's for us to help tune our product. I don't think that's how it's been used. I think it's been used to kind of manipulate the understanding of how the product performs out of the box. But I think there is room for it. I think we, like you said, probably just need to think about that.
Yeah, I think that the biggest outcome is making sure that if config changes are used, that it actually makes it into the product and into our customers' hands, right?
I think there's a product philosophy question here of do you want to allow customers to do their own detection engineering, and that's the point of your product, versus a product that does out of the box capabilities and maybe also allows doing that. But I think most customers in most scenarios won't actually go through the process of building their own detections. in that sense, I would have hoped that configuration changes would have been maybe narrowed down. If you're doing, ad hoc detection engineering as a response to something you've seen 2 days ago, that's maybe, different than, oh, I've missed that data source and I didn't configure that well. Now let's rerun it, with the right event log. So I think there has to be a bit more thought into or granularity to the definition of a configuration change, detection engineering versus log collection, or you can just turn this off entirely. If you're looking at other competitive testing from other testing vendors, they're not allowing you to do that. You can't just go ahead and reconfigure your product to win the test. You can try again next time, which is generally, I think, a good approach, a more sanitized approach. But given the fact that it exists, I think we need a bit more, either more granularity or more limitations on what is allowed for a configuration change.
Definitely.
But overall, still looking forward to round 7. I'm hoping that we can regroup next year and I'll talk about where we're at then.
Absolutely. I'll just have the folks on the webinar throw the slides up one more time. Just want to give folks a look at the resources available. I was sharing this before. If you want to know more about the managed services evaluation, it is there. Lots of additional resources. We've touched on things. Yoni's team has done a lot of research into the DPRK and their threats and ransomware. A lot of great tools for you. We'll try to make this available. I'm not exactly sure how the slides will be made available, but if you want to take a quick screenshot and you want to do additional research on any of this, these resources are there for you. And I think that's it with the presentation side. Now it's just, let's get into questions. And I think, Parker, you've been tracking anything interesting you want to address in the questions that have been coming in.
No, I've been kind of, I addressed most of those right before you threw that back up. So I think I'm good.
Okay. I did see one question. Let's see. When vendors make configuration changes, where are these reported? Where are those reported? I think users of those products would like to know. Okay. Yes. I can definitely show that to you, but if you actually go into, it's interesting. If I share my screen one more time, let's do this. And I go in, I'll show you exactly where that happens. Maybe I'll pick somebody that I know had configuration changes. You would see it in the results here, right? If you want to see how those configuration changes affect the results, you'd see it there. You would also see it. I'll just pull somebody off here and put somebody else in. You might see something like this. This is volume. And I think if we were to look at, like, say, maybe it wasn't signed out. I can't remember who it was. Somebody had a lot of configuration changes in the round. You might see it here. I'm not seeing it actually here right now, but if you hover over the volume, you would see the configuration changes there as well. If you wanted to actually see the configuration changes they made, that's not revealed in the MITRE data. I think you'd need to get in touch with the vendor and ask them what they did to get better coverage for the adversary in that environment. But if you're just looking to understand how to find it in the results, that's where you would see it. I would toggle the configuration change check mark there. Lots of other comments. Anything sticking out to anybody in terms of other questions?
We've got John Bradshaw asking, what new features and capabilities did you add in the past year based on the R5 results, and how did they help you this year? Wow.
Great
That's
question.
A big question, John.
Yeah, we actually saw some of that. I didn't dive into it, but I think there was some things that the team had done to kind of, rather than looking at alert by alert and showcasing the specific tactic or technique of that alert, there's a really nice preview pane on the left in Cortex XDR now that when you're looking into an incident, it shows the mapping of the entire incident to everything in the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I'll try to find that in a screenshot in the results, but I'd love to see that. Yoni, thoughts on that?
There's definitely a lot. Every time we go down a path of testing, we do a retro. We start trying to understand, what we could have done better. Even if you're looking at 100% detection, there's always room to improve. Putting aside the false positive piece or misses on the protection, and it starts with better UI, better presentation. During this process, we take screenshots and then we provide them to MITRE, and then there's a back and forth. So if you have a very good screenshot that pretty much encapsulates data source,
just
what happened?
If I can get them to share the screen again, I think I found that one that we were looking for. Yep. So I'll just blow this up. This was in obfuscation of files and just an example of one of the new features that's in there. This is what I was talking about, right? We're actually drilled down into a specific execution But you can see a map of all of the different phases of the MITRE attack framework and where that hit within Cortex XDR. That was a new feature that I really enjoyed seeing in the product that I was referring.
And that's exactly that. Even just the fact that we have an easier way of communicating with MITRE of what we did, how we did it, and this is a great example. Just makes this the same thing makes the analysts' lives easier because they have the same kind of problem. Sharing information in a easily digestible way is a problem. And even I'm not even touching the core detection pieces and the better agents and all of that. So even just this kind of small thing has been inspired by our interactions with MITRE and them telling us you need to do 3 clicks to get to the data we need, and now we just do 1 click. And again, same kind of actionable approach to detection also applies in the UX.
We've always had that mapping at the incident level, right? But then when you're drilling down and in the past, when you were drilling down and looking at individual actions that happened in the causality chain, you'd kind of lose where you were in the attack process. And so having that here brings that back, and you understand where in the process you're looking at and the importance of that step. So good question.
Okay.
Thanks for the question, John.
Can you stay right here?
Yeah.
I've got another question. And how much more time do we have? We've got a couple minutes.
We have just a couple minutes. So we're
okay, I've got
done.
one more question. This is one of the first questions, so I don't want to ignore it. And it's an interesting one. Given the increasing complexity of ransomware, no, go ahead and stay right there, Peter.
Oh, yep.
Given the increasing complexity of ransomware attacks and evolving tactics used by adversaries, how do MITRE Round 6 evaluations account for real-world scalability and operational constraints in enterprise environments? That's part one. And part two is, and from your perspective, what lessons can SOC leaders take away to improve proactive threat hunting and response strategies based on that? I don't know if you got all that.
You want to take that? I missed half of it, but go ahead, take a shot, Yoni or Parker.
It is in the chat, so it's we repeated it here in the chat. So if you want to take a look at it, there, go ahead. I think Yoni is going to have the best answer for this.
I think that from one side of the fence that they're really making an effort, but there are definitely limitations in the fact that, again, it's not a real environment. You don't have random people doing random things. You don't have your production server that's running an old version open to the internet or an RDP with leaked credentials. So they are really trying within the limitations of a simulated test that has to be reproducible in every environment to really give that approach of what ransomware threat actors actually are doing. So does it apply for the scalability perspective, like alert, the number of alerts you'd see in a production environment? Not so much, but does it try to emulate that in a successful manner, and especially with the false positive perspective added in the volume perspective? If you see something that's very false positive prone and very volume from an alert perspective prone, and you see that in such a small environment, you can just do the math and multiply that by the number of endpoints you have, and there's maybe 20 endpoints in this entire test. Multiply that by a regular enterprise, and you have a lot of fun. I think that that's one piece of the puzzle. What lessons can SOC leaders take to improve proactive threat hunting and response strategies based on these results? I think if you're looking at the actual test itself and you're not, you're looking at your detection capabilities and you're looking at what coverage you have, and you're not aligned with any of the things that are happening here, you might be off. And that's something that we're as vendors learning. But if you're running a more tailored detection platform, maybe your own SIM or your own XDR, and you're tailoring most of the detections, and you're not tracking what threat actors are actually doing, and again, specifically MITRE are good at emulating those, then you're maybe misaligned with reality in a sense.
I think that is pretty much time. I have my own take there too, but for brevity's sake, we'll leave it at that. Peter?
Yeah, well, I just want to thank you guys both. Parker, great to have you again. Second year in a row, looking at this with me. Yoni, kudos to you and the team. Thank you for all the hard work you put in to the product research. It's driving outstanding results here in MITRE, but more importantly in the real world. And to those who are watching, if you want to know more, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out. We'd love to do a POC for you, give you a look at the product, give you a chance to get your hands on it, and explore what makes the difference within Cortex XDR. So thank you, gentlemen, both, and thanks for joining the webinar.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.